everything are the ones carrying everybody else's storms. Yeah, that's the empath, the listener, the fixer, the healer, the one who can walk into silence and still hear the pain humming underneath. They don't just notice your sadness, they absorb it, like a sponge drinking up spilled wine on the floor, and for the longest time that becomes their role, to please, to keep the peace, to nod when they should scream, to smile when they should leave, to say, "It's fine, I understand," even when their soul is bleeding out under the table, because that's what people expect from the empath. That's the silent contract. You feel for us, you bend for us, you break for us. But here's the shift nobody talks about. What happens when the empath says no more? See, there's a dangerous beauty in awakening. When the one who used to please suddenly starts to see, the masks fall off. The charm, the manipulation, the subtle ways people use kindness like a leash, it all becomes crystal. The empath's eyes open, and the world doesn't look the same anymore. The room doesn't feel as heavy because they're no longer carrying everyone's weight. And that truth, it cuts. It's not soft, it's not gentle. It's sharp as glass under bare feet. Because the empath starts to realize, all this time I was drowning, and half of them didn't even care I couldn't breathe. They start to see the difference between love and dependency, between support and exploitation, between friendship and convenience. It rattles people too, because when the empath stops pleasing, the takers start panicking. They're not used to hearing no. They're not used to silence where validation used to be. They're not used to the mirror being held up to their face. And suddenly, the dynamic shifts. The one who gave everything is no longer available for free. And it's wild, because that's when the empath's power starts glowing. For so long, their strength was hidden under politeness, under yeses, under sacrifices nobody asked for but everybody took. But when they start seeing the truth, that strength doesn't just glow, it blinds. It sets boundaries like walls. It says, I will love you, but I will not lose myself for you. I will feel you, but I will not carry your chaos while mine goes unheard. This is the moment the empath turns from being the background healer to the frontline warrior. Same heart, same depth, same compassion, but now with clarity, now with truth, now with eyes wide open. The silent contract of the empath, always giving, rarely receiving. That's the first truth nobody wants to write down, but everybody benefits from. The empath is born into this role quietly. Nobody hands them a script. Nobody pulls them aside and says, hey, you're going to be the one that absorbs everything while giving nothing back to yourself. But life trains them into it. From early moments, they're praised for being so understanding, for being so patient, for never making a fuss. Every time they set their own needs aside, someone claps. Every time they bite back their truth, someone smiles. Every time they bend, stretch, and twist just to keep peace alive, someone whispers how kind they are. And without realizing it, they've signed this invisible contract. I will keep the balance in the room, even if it breaks me. This contract doesn't come with ink or paper. It's sealed in size, in expectations, in the way people's faces relax when the empath says, it's okay, don't worry about me. And over time, that phrase becomes a mantra, almost like a cage disguised as kindness. Don't worry about me. That's the secret clause. Everyone else first, me last. And what's worse is that most people who benefit from this dynamic don't even see it as taking. To them, it's just natural. Of course, the empath will listen for hours. Of course, they'll adjust their schedule. Of course, they'll understand if you let them down. Why wouldn't they? That's who they are. That's what they do. But this silent contract eats away at them. On the outside, it looks like strength. On the inside, it feels like depletion, because the empath isn't powered by infinite batteries. They feel deeply, and that depth is beautiful, but it's also draining. Imagine carrying 20 bags through an airport, not because you packed them, but because other people didn't want to hold their own. That's what daily life feels like. Carrying grief that isn't theirs, guilt that isn't theirs, tension that isn't theirs, and yet they still smile, they still nod, they still keep the room calm, and the unspoken rule. They're not supposed to ask for the same in return. When they finally open up, when the weight on their chest becomes unbearable, suddenly the room gets quiet. Suddenly the listeners scatter. Suddenly the shoulders they carried for years are nowhere to be found. That's the cruel twist of this contract. We love you for giving, but we're uncomfortable when you need. The same people who have leaned on the empath for comfort will look confused when the roles are reversed. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're conditioned to see the empath as bottomless, like a well that never runs dry, like a candle that can burn without melting. They don't notice the cracks, the exhaustion, the tears cried in silence, because the empath has trained them too well. Trained them to believe that pleasing is natural, that giving is automatic, that receiving is foreign. And so the contract holds steady, invisible, unfair, but deeply embedded. And here's the quiet tragedy of it. The empath signs this contract with their silence. They don't argue, they don't rage, they don't call it out. They accept it because rocking the boat feels like betrayal. They accept it because keeping peace feels safer than demanding balance. They accept it because in their mind, love means sacrifice, even if the sacrifice is always theirs. So the cycle continues. They give and give and give. They stretch themselves thin. They forget their own voice, their own needs, their own presence, and nobody notices, because the silent contract was never designed to protect them. It was designed to protect everyone else. And as long as they keep signing it, as long as they keep saying, "Don't worry about me," the world around them will keep taking that as permission, the breaking point, when yes turns into no. It doesn't arrive with fireworks, no dramatic drumroll announcing its presence. It creeps in quietly, like a storm building in the distance. The empath goes through years of nodding, years of agreeing, years of sacrificing in silence. They swallow disappointment like medicine, convincing themselves it's all for peace, all for love, all for keeping harmony alive. But slowly, piece by piece, something begins to fracture. The weight of every forced yes begins to pile up until it feels like cement hardening around their chest. And one day, the simplest request, the lightest expectation, the smallest demand becomes too much. The voice that always bent finally stiffens. The lips that always said yes form around a word they never thought they'd speak, no. It doesn't happen because they suddenly stopped caring. That's the mistake people make when they hear it. They think the empath has turned cold, that their heart has dried out. But the truth is different. The no doesn't come from absence of love. It comes from survival. It's the body saying, "I cannot carry another ounce without breaking." It's the spirit saying, "I deserve space to breathe too." It's the heart saying, "If I keep giving at this pace, there will be nothing left of me to give." The breaking point is not a rejection of others. It's a reclamation of self. And when it comes, the air in the room changes. People who are used to the automatic yes suddenly look shocked. They pause, confused, maybe even offended, because the contract has been broken. The pattern has been interrupted. The hand that always gave is suddenly held back, and that unsettles the takers more than the empath ever imagined. Some react with anger. "How dare you change?" Some with guilt. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" And some with distance. "If you won't give me what I want, then what are you good for?" The empath feels that backlash deeply, but the breaking point isn't about pleasing anymore. It's about truth. The shift is small in sound, but massive in meaning. That no is heavy with history. It carries every ignored need, every silenced voice, every late night spent holding someone else's pain while their own went unheard. It carries the years of shrinking themselves to fit inside other people's comfort zones. It carries the exhaustion of playing savior while secretly needing saving. That no is not a single syllable. It's an eruption of years that went unseen. And for the empath, the first time it leaves their lips, it feels both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because they've been conditioned to believe boundaries are cruelty. Liberating because for the first time, they taste what it means to honor themselves. The body shakes, the voice wavers, but inside, something steadies. A new kind of strength begins to root itself in the soil of their soul. From that moment, the pattern shifts. Every no becomes a reminder that their worth isn't tied to sacrifice. Every refusal becomes a quiet rebellion against the silent contract they never agreed to in the first place. They begin to learn that saying no isn't selfish, it's sacred, that drawing lines isn't rejection, it's protection, that not every fight for peace requires their surrender. The breaking point is where the empath begins to realize that their heart was never meant to be currency. and their kindness was never meant to be exploited. And once the yesa turns into no, nothing feels the same again. The people around them either adapt or fall away. The world looks different when seen through the lens of boundaries. The empath, for the first time, starts to feel the shape of their own edges, the strength of their own spine, the clarity of their own voice. And that shift, quiet as it may seem, marks the moment they step into an entirely different way of being. The unveiling of truth, masks, manipulation, and hidden motives. This is the moment the empath's vision sharpens. For years, they've been living with blurred lines, trusting words over actions, believing that kindness given will always equal kindness returned. They've been so focused on maintaining peace that they overlook the cracks in people's intentions. But when the shift begins, when they step back from pleasing and start observing, it's like the curtains are pulled wide open on a stage that was dimly lit before. What once looked like love now reveals dependency. What once felt like friendship now looks like convenience. What once seemed like loyalty now exposes itself as control. The empath begins to notice patterns they ignored before. The friend who only calls when they need to vent, but never asks how the empath is holding up. The partner who thrives on their patience, but withholds the same grace when the tables turn. The family member who constantly reminds them how good they are, but uses that very goodness as a leash to pull them back into submission. Masks start slipping, not because people have changed, but because the empath has stopped filtering their vision through guilt and obligation. And with that clarity comes discomfort. Seeing manipulation for what it is feels like being burned by light that's too bright. The empath realizes that not everyone they loved actually loved them back in the same way. Some were attached to their usefulness, not their essence. Some were addicted to the empathy they offered, not interested in reciprocating it. Some weren't even conscious of their own behavior. They had simply grown comfortable with the empath playing the endless giver. But intention doesn't soften impact, and the impact of these realizations hits hard. What makes it heavier is that the empath is not built to detach easily. They don't uncover these truths with a cold heart. They uncover them with tears, with shaking hands, with sleepless nights spent replaying conversations and noticing the signs they missed. Every mask they see removed feels like a small betrayal, a reminder that their intuition was right all along, but their desire to believe the best in people had kept them blind. They feel the sting of recognizing that some of the deepest connections in their lives were not rooted in authenticity, but in imbalance. Yet, this unveiling is also powerful. For the first time, the empath sees themselves clearly too. They see how their own need to avoid conflict made it easy for manipulators to thrive. They see how their fear of rejection made them overgive. They see how their longing for harmony sometimes silenced their boundaries before they were even spoken. This truth isn't just about others. It's about the empath reclaiming responsibility for their own part in the cycle. And while that realization is painful, it's also empowering because now they know where the cracks formed and they know how to keep them from opening again. The more they lean into this truth, the sharper their inner compass becomes. They begin to distinguish between genuine kindness and disguised control. They notice the subtle cues, the way someone's tone changes when they're denied, the way their presence disappears when they're no longer receiving benefits, the way praise is given like a bribe to keep the empath compliant. These details were always there, but now they stand out like bold ink on a blank page. And what happens when they see it? They start adjusting. They stop offering blind yeses. They stop justifying other people's selfishness. They stop carrying relationships that only survive when they are the one feeding them. They begin to understand that compassion without boundaries isn't love. It's a slow erasure of self. And once they see this truth, they cannot unsee it. Every interaction, every bond, every exchange becomes filtered through a sharper awareness. The empath realizes that masks may hide faces, but they can't hide energy. And once the manipulation is revealed, it's impossible to fall back into the old illusions again. The shift in power, boundaries as a new form of love. When the empath reaches this stage, something radical begins to take place. For the longest time, Their love has been measured by how much they can endure, how much they can give away, how much of themselves they can sacrifice in silence. But as they grow into clarity, they begin to see that true love doesn't demand constant depletion. True love doesn't mean letting yourself be stepped over just to keep the peace intact. It dawns on them that love with no boundaries isn't love at all, it's enabling. And so the empath learns that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but fences that protect what's sacred within. This shift changes the energy of every interaction. Where once they would have automatically said yes, now they pause, they weigh, they ask themselves if the request honors their well-being. Where once they would have absorbed another's pain without question, now they ask, is this mine to carry? That pause is powerful because it reclaims authority over their own space. Boundaries become a form of self-respect, but also a form of respect for others, because it teaches relationships to balance instead of leaning on one side. People often misunderstand this change. They see the empath saying no, pulling back, refusing to overextend, and they think it's coldness. They think it's selfishness. They think the heart has hardened. But what they don't see is that boundaries allow the empath's love to deepen in ways it never could before. Because when they no longer feel exploited, when they no longer feel drained, the love they give is pure, not pressured. It comes from abundance, not obligation. It comes with honesty, not hidden resentment. Boundaries protect the quality of their love, so it stops being scattered crumbs for everyone and becomes a steady feast for the people who genuinely deserve it. The shift in power is not about dominance, it's about equilibrium. The empath has spent years being the anchor for others, but boundaries let them finally anchor themselves. This means they no longer feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for walking away when something feels toxic. They begin to realize that protecting their energy is not cruelty, it's wisdom. It's choosing to sustain their compassion instead of letting it be consumed to the point of extinction. The world around them reacts to this power in different ways. Those who are used to taking without giving may resist. They may call the empath difficult, accuse them of changing, try to guilt them back into the old patterns. But those who truly value the empath will adapt, will adjust, will rise to meet them in mutual respect. Boundaries expose who is willing to grow and who only came to consume. That truth hurts, but it also frees. For the empath, this is an awakening into a new kind of strength. No longer do they measure their worth by the weight they can carry. No longer do they keep relationships alive by bleeding themselves dry. They start to understand that the most loving thing they can do for others is to stand whole, not broken, to give from fullness, not emptiness, to say no when necessary so that every yes has meaning. Boundaries are no longer the enemy of love. They become the structure that allows love to thrive without distortion. As this power takes root, the empath notices the transformation inside themselves. The constant exhaustion begins to fade. The quiet resentment that once lived beneath their smile starts to dissolve. They feel lighter, freer, more authentic. They can show up in relationships with honesty instead of performance. They can give without secretly hoping someone will notice their sacrifice. They can rest without fearing abandonment, and this strength doesn't make them less loving. It makes them unshakably so, because now their love has both depth and direction. The transformation from people, pleaser to awakened warrior, it doesn't happen overnight and it doesn't happen gently. The empath goes through fire to reach this point. Years of carrying, of bending, of trying to be everything for everyone else carve deep lines in their spirit. At first, they think this is their role forever, to be the quiet rescuer, the unthanked giver, the one who sacrifices silently. But there comes a moment when the weight is too heavy, when the exhaustion is too deep, and they decide to choose themselves. That choice ignites a shift that cannot be undone. They begin to step into a new version of themselves, not the passive peacemaker, but a warrior forged from every boundary they've learned to draw, every truth they've dared to see, every no they've finally spoken. This transformation is not about abandoning compassion. The heart of the empath remains soft, remains tuned into the world, remains deeply connected to the feelings around them. What changes is the way they hold that compassion. Instead of pouring it out recklessly, they direct it with intention. Instead of scattering themselves to keep everyone else whole, they center themselves so that they can offer support without collapse. The people-pleaser version of them gave love out of fear, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being unloved if they stopped giving. The awakened warrior gives love from strength, from choice, from the clear understanding that their worth isn't tied to how much they sacrifice. The shift is visible. Their presence feels different. They walk into a room with boundaries wrapped around them like invisible armor. Not armor to block connection, but armor that shields them from manipulation and exploitation. The same empath who once apologized for existing now speaks with steady conviction. The same soul who once ignored their own needs now advocates for them without shame. It's not aggression, it's clarity. It's not selfishness, it's sovereignty. They no longer confuse compliance with kindness. They no longer equate silence with peace. For those who knew them only as the people pleaser, this transformation can be unsettling. They expect the same unlimited access, the same unquestioned support, the same endless patience. But the awakened warrior doesn't operate under those rules anymore. They will listen, but not at the cost of their own sanity. They will help, but not if it means erasing themselves. They will love, but only if love flows both ways. Some people fall away when faced with this version of the empath, because they can no longer consume without consequence. Others draw closer, respecting the strength, appreciating the authenticity, finally seeing the empath as a whole being rather than just a source of comfort. Inside, the empath feels both grief and relief. Grief for the years they spent invisible to themselves. Grief for the relationships that dissolve when they stop pleasing. Grief for the illusions that shattered when the truth revealed itself. But relief too, because for the first time they feel aligned, awake, and grounded in who they really are. The awakened warrior doesn't live to please. They live to honor their truth. And in doing so, their compassion becomes more powerful, more precise, more sustainable. They no longer drown in other people's storms. They stand steady, offering shelter without losing themselves to the tide. This transformation is the ultimate reclamation of power. The empath is no longer defined by what they can give away, but by the strength of what they choose to keep. They carry their sensitivity not as a burden, but as a weapon of clarity. A light that cuts through deception and reveals authenticity. They are still soft, but no longer weak. Still giving, but no longer exploited. Still loving, but no longer at the expense of their own soul. This is the empath's evolution, the rise from a silent giver into a conscious, awakened warrior who knows that their heart is not a tool for others to use, but a sacred force meant to be honored.